Okay, let's start. I still see people filing in, but they can join when they join. So today we're going to talk about applications. I imagine a lot of folks here are either parents or families of 11th graders or 11th graders themselves. Um, this is the time that you really need to be thinking about what does a great college application look like? Why are some college applications better than others? What is it that that the admissions offices are looking for? So we're here to talk about that. We scheduled this for an hour and a half. Hopefully we'll take a little less time. We always schedule our webinars for an hour and run way over. So this is my attempt to rectify that and hopefully, be a little bit more realistic. Part of the reason why we go over is because people have a lot of questions, which is fantastic. We want you to ask all of your questions. And the way you do that is you want to put them in the Q&A. We're going to do really, really brief introductions. I'll start since I'm speaking already. I'm Lisa. I'm the CEO and founder of Ivy Tutors Network. We're a personalized education company that's in our 21st school year. Hard to believe, but 21. And I went to Columbia University. I grew up in New York City. I went to Bronx Science, which is a specialized high school. My company hires over 90 mentors and tutors, test prep experts, because we really believe that the people around you in your education process, the people make all the difference. So we try to hire the best of the best. And so excited to have John here, who is handling our college admissions office.
Great. Thank you so much, Lisa. My name is John Morganelli. For those of you who are not familiar, background is obviously in college admissions. I've worked at 3 different schools here in the US. Most recently, I was the director of admissions at Cornell for the College of Arts and Sciences. Spent a lot of time and energy after my admissions career focusing on understanding what methodology would allow students to understand what they're attempting to create and why they're trying to create it. And hopefully we can share a little bit of that with you today.
Wonderful. All right. So pretty simple agenda this time. There's a lot in each of these categories, but we're going to briefly take you through our system just so you understand some of the vocabulary we're using when we talk about these applications. And then we're going to talk about our results, which is just a little bit of like, evidence, like why should you listen to us? And then John's going to dive into the meat here, which is looking at 3 different applications, 2 that we think are more successful and one that maybe doesn't, that misses the mark a little bit. And we'll tell you exactly why. I know that's why everybody's here. And then this is a fun part. So there's a Reddit trend, right, called ChanceMe, and so we asked folks to send in some information about them, and we have 5 eager participants that we've chosen who sent us a bit of information about their high school transcript and their extracurriculars. And John's going to go through our rubric and tell these folks who's, hopefully they didn't give us their real names. We asked for an alias, an alias. So hopefully that's it. But if you'll recognize who you are, right? We'll say the name, and John will say whether he thinks your application as it is today will make it into your dream school or what you have to do to get closer to that. So, all right, real quick, I'm just going to flash before you here as evidence of why why you should listen to us is these are our results. We work with many students every year, and we're really, really proud that a lot of our students are making it into these top tier schools. And as you can see, by working with a kind of robust consulting program like ours that's really well thought through, and we'll go through all the parts in the next couple of slides, you're between 6 and 19 times, more likely to get into one of these dream schools. And let me tell you exactly why. John, do you want to talk about the method?
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you, Lisa. So PAGE is an acronym that my team and I created, and we were doing that because as we were reviewing applications and trying to identify what made applications likely to be successful versus unlikely to be successful, of course, the difference is not how well written they are, right? That's not the difference. The difference is in the elements and the reflection and depth on those elements. We'll start with PAGE and kind of go through the acronym to start. P stands for perspective, right? And so when we talk about perspective, this is really how you see the world. And we'll talk a little bit more detail about how the perspective interacts with the other aspects of this. We have A for activity. And this is just an illustration that we need action, right? We can talk about things in our application, but there has to be some action behind it in order for it to matter.
Right.
And
Show,
we have
don't tell, right? As your English teacher in middle school probably said over and over. Show, don't tell.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. And then you have G, goal. And, it's important as you think through this, like there are, of course, a variety of goals oftentimes, but there's one main goal, and that's generally the academic goal. And we'll talk a little bit about how that plays with the activity and the perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have the final letter E, ethos. And it works well with the letter E, ethos. I mean, you can change that word to theme or brand, however you want to call it. But we're really
Right.
talking about how do we take a concept that's personal and intellectual and relevant to the student and write a very clear, concise statement about it and make sure that that statement's permeating the entire application.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so like
Yeah.
let's just talk just briefly about kind of like how these pieces interact. So we start with
Mm-hmm.
G always from my team and I. We think about like, okay, we can't do anything. We can't talk about your activities or your perspective, or your ethos unless we know your goal. So at the most broad level, that's your prospective major, the major you're going to put on your application, prospective, not your actual major, because that could change. And that prospective major is probably your broad goal. And then we could talk about a more specific goal. So like maybe I'm interested in majoring in economics. That's my academic goal. A more specific goal might be I'm interested in economics related, or maybe the economics of urban centers, right? That'd be a little more specific. And then maybe you could even get more specific than that if you were talking about, housing and security economics in urban centers, right? So we can have a broad goal, a more narrow goal, but in the end, it's an academic goal. In 99% of the cases, unless you're a recruited athlete or otherwise, like that's the important part, the academic goal.
Mm-hmm. And I just want to butt in here for a second to say that that obviously not all high school students have such a clear and precise goal as the one that John just mentioned. But that's part of how we help. And also, I think that what we notice is that students who start to explore a goal as early as possible, like ninth or 10th grade, are able to then later on get more and more precise with their goals. So if you start with like, well, I'm a ninth grader and, I like math, right? And then we say, okay, well, do you like business? Do you like economics? Are you interested in finance? Engineering? And so then you're able to kind of get closer to that very, very specific, precise goal that John mentioned. Not that you have to be a ninth grader; it's still possible to do in 11th grade, but it's something that takes a little time to figure out for sure, and some expertise. Yeah, and then also important, and I get this question all the time from parents. How is my teenager supposed to know what their career is going to be like? Well, that's not what we're talking about here. It's just what you're putting in the application you're interested in possibly majoring in. But it's so important that you have that perspective.
So important. I'm so glad you said that. You're right. It's really hard for young people to make these decisions early. But remember, we're not making this big decision. We're actually just saying, how do you want to spend your time in high school building,
Mm,
investigating areas and building hopefully a story that can translate into your application about the A activities, right? So we go from G goal and then we go back to the A activities. And if you're very young, then the A activities are likely helping inform the goal, right? Like I joined the newspaper club. wow, journalism's pretty cool. All of a sudden, that could become a goal.
Hmm.
Or the opposite, you could have a goal, right? And then you could start to identify specific A activities that support that goal. Either one could happen.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, we see
And
that
then
all the time.
yeah, and a lot of times, I think the first question, Lisa, you and I get, especially when we're chatting with younger students, is they want to know, does the activity, does this internship, does this summer program matter, And so the
Yes.
question really is, does the A activity support the G goal? And if it does, it probably matters. How well connected it is really is based upon how well you can communicate it. If you see the clear connection between the A activity and the G goal, it probably works. And if you're struggling to figure out how that A activity supports the G goal, it probably is less important. It doesn't mean it's not important at all, but probably a little bit less important.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then quickly, P perspective. This is really honestly the difference between the students who get into top tier schools and the students who are waitlisted. Most of the
Yes.
students who apply to good schools, they have a goal. It might not be as specific as Lisa just noted that I said, but they have a general idea of what they're interested in, and generally their A activities are kind of connected to the G goal. The real difference though is the P perspective. And my team and I, as we were looking through all the different essays and activity lists, we kept asking, why does this work? And it kept coming back to the same thing. The student was either developing a perspective through the activity, or they had a perspective, and that perspective was informing the way they engaged in the activity. But either way, the development of the perspective or the perspective impacting the activity itself, that's the most important part. And a lot of students miss that. Sometimes they don't even think their perspective matters. And it's the most important part.
Absolutely. Absolutely. A little bit part of that show don't tell also, right? Like anybody can say, um, I'm interested in economics and I had this internship and then but then when you're asked to speak about it, well, how did that go? How did that make you see the world? How did that change your perspective or your opinion on certain things? Um, that's a completely different, a much more mature way to look at the world, and it shows that you're college ready and ready for
100%.
some of these, really, top and most competitive
Absolutely.
institutions.
And the only way you can really develop the real perspectives is through activity, So there's this action oriented aspect. And the last thing I'll just say is ethos, because I didn't hit it.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Basically, if you hit the P perspective, right, and every time you have an activity, hopefully it hits the goal, it's connected somehow, and you develop a P perspective, and you're going to have a lot of activities in your application. And what, our team does is we look through all those activities, we check to see how connected they are to the goal. We challenge the students to think about perspectives, hopefully while they're doing it, but sometimes retroactively, so that, they didn't realize that they did have a perspective and it was impacting that activity. And then what
Yes.
we do is we take the P perspective plus the A activity plus the G goal. And when there's commonality across the activities, we create these ethos statements, a clear statement of this is who I am in this application as it relates to my academic interests and the perspectives that I have.
Yeah. Yeah. So important. Um, so, this is the high level, the very high level summary page of what makes an application a definite yes. On top of course, having the right grades and the right standardized test scores to be considered.
Exactly.
But we'll go in more detail. So we have this is, you can see that these are like, screenshots of Excels pasted in here. And that's because we have quite a complex system. It starts with 17 different metrics, and that's what you see on the right side here. Then John will talk about these percentages that he's created. But basically each of the metrics, we think of students as having these 17 facets to their application, and each of them gets a score of 1 to 5. And then there's a whole rubric, and John will go through this, which gives you these percents. But here, I'll let you explain.
Yeah, thank you. So, what we've done here, what I did was, as I was trying to benchmark student college lists very early, was kind of work backwards and ask myself, well, what were we looking at when we were making decisions at Cornell? And I was part of the Ivy Plus group when I was at Cornell. That's all the Ivy League schools plus MIT, Duke, and Stanford. The directors of admissions of each of those schools get together every 2 years, and they have an enrollment summit, and they talk about how they make decisions. And I would say that these 17 metrics are pretty representative of the main factors that most of these schools are considering. Are there some other variabilities? Yes, there are some, but these are the main ones. So if you look at the 17, you'll see at the top, there are 3 green categories. That is grades, standardized test, and rigor. Rigor meaning
Most important, right?
yeah, most important by far. And rigor being,
that's like the door opener.
yes, 100%. Bar of
Yeah.
entry. Rigor is the level of your curriculum within the context of your high school, right? So if maybe your school offers only 4 AP classes and you take 4, well, then we would consider that rigorous within the context of your curriculum. If your school offers 20 AP classes and you took 2, well, then you didn't really engage in the rigorous curriculum. Okay, so those are bars of entry. I will just mention standardized tests are still used very much as a bar of entry. There are certain schools, of course, that are optional or blind, and we can talk about that in more detail later on. But
Fewer and
generally,
fewer every week.
yeah, fewer and fewer, definitely every week.
Yeah.
Okay, so those are bars of entry. And if you don't have, reasonably good grades and at least tests that are connected, at a median 50% level, the schools you're applying to, or you don't have the reasonable amount of rigor, you honestly you have no real chance. They're barely even reading your essays because you haven't hit the minimum bars of entry. And so, if your grades aren't good or your standardized tests aren't there, then that's when you need tutoring and prep just to make sure that the qualitative stuff that you do, the things that you care about and believe are part of the conversation. Does that make sense, Lisa?
Absolutely.
Okay. Then we got the middle category, and I would say that these are quite impactful. Some of these categories are changeable and some are not. So the first is app type. That is if I'm applying regular decision, early decision, restrictive early action, early decision 2. These are all different application plans. And if you were to look at all these different institutions, you would see the admit rates for ED1 versus regular decision versus ED2 are very, very different, right? So app type really matters a lot.
Yeah. It's a question we get a lot. Does it matter if I apply early?
There's a lot of misinformation about that. Is it, I hear all the time, for rolling schools, it's important to get in early. Well, like in a real rolling school, generally they're not overly selective. The big universities like University of Michigan, that's not rolling, but you could argue getting in early is important. So app type and understanding how you're applying and the size of the institution, how they make decisions is important.
Yeah.
Then you have engagement rating. And this is really probably one of the most important things outside of your grades and standardized tests and rigor. They want to understand how involved were you? And when we say involved, that can mean so many things, right? Like that could be in school clubs, it could be YouTube channels, it could be podcast articles, it could be a million different things that could be quote unquote engagement. But we go back to P.A.G.E. Does the A activity engagement support the G goal? If it doesn't, it's probably less important unless it's really quite impressive. Otherwise, we want it to be connected to the goal. And as we think about the different types of engagements, and we can talk about this in other sessions in the future, not all of these A activities are created equally as it relates to your ability to develop and infuse your perspective. And so when we talk about, for example, research, great opportunity to develop perspective. And once you're done with research, to infuse the perspective into other things. Whereas like a school club, still an activity that could support the G goal because of the more structured nature of it, sometimes harder to develop the P perspectives that are going to move the needle as much in an application. But engagement is important, and it's the totality of your engagement. So you have to have a little bit of foundational stuff like in school, some more impressive stuff like research, some motivational stuff like articles and YouTube channels. All of that stuff together creates a really compelling app. Then we have achievement, and achievement is something that we try to focus on the story first, and then achievement is kind of like the cherry on top. We know that we can't necessarily control, right? We can prep students for competition, but we can't control who's winning these competitions. And, even if you're a great student and you try really hard, you might not win. And so, even though achievement is certainly valued, as from a consulting perspective, it's kind of a cherry on top that gets you to that Harvard, Princeton, Yale, Stanford level, in my opinion. But you don't really need achievement to be successful at 98% of the schools, including some of the Ivy League schools.
Okay, that's good to know.
Although it doesn't hurt.
Right.
And
then
personal quality.
I know you end up with like a score of like 65 at the very, very low end to 115 when you do this rubric. So, that's something that you could get a 0 in, right? And still
Sure.
do really well.
Absolutely. And same
Yeah.
thing with personal qualities and obstacles, which are often
Right.
zeros for most people. Like, they didn't have some groundbreaking life obstacle. So that doesn't really move the needle for most students, but sometimes it does. Prospective major is probably the biggest thing that you can change early
Yeah,
on and really have a huge impact on your chances. And so we spent a lot of time on strategic prospective majors.
definitely.
Um, ethnicity, in light of the affirmative action decision, you could argue that ethnicity doesn't matter. I would argue that that's not the case. I think ethnicity still matters. You can see the supplemental essay questions have all
Right.
leaned towards diversity, and I'm confident that these schools are still relatively aware of the distribution of diversity that they're making offers to. So your ethnicity certainly, in my opinion, still plays a role. But if you are a majority applicant, white, Asian, you do have an opportunity to weigh in on diversity in a way that you didn't before. It used to be like, checkbox. Now it's an essay. And so there's a kind of a way for you to engage and be part of the conversation and maybe move the needle there.
Interesting.
Citizenship, obviously, most of the time you can't change too much, some once in a while, but international is a lot harder than applying as a domestic student almost all the time.
Right.
Uh, your high school is impactful. I would say that we are seeing a shift in the dynamic here. There are things called feeder schools, right? And these schools like Stuyvesant, I saw we had 2 students who filled out the form from Stuyvesant. That would be a clear feeder school for a lot of top tier schools. Bronx Science, a lot of those schools in New York City have high reputations and they are considered feeder schools. But be aware,
Yeah.
that's changing a little bit with the diversity decisions in that they can't take as many students. Not that actually the New York City top tier schools are actually quite diverse, but there are some other schools that are not diverse that are top tier
Well,
and
you
they can't
mentioned,
take all the
yeah, and
students.
you mentioned 2 public schools. Yeah. So,
Yeah,
but with a merit-based test to get in. So,
right.
yeah, all kinds of
But high
schools
school matters
similar.
is the general
Yes,
statement I would
yes,
make.
yes, yes, definitely.
And then the last category are less important. These are what we refer to as institutional hooks. And these are basically different from school to school. If you go to Cornell or Columbia or Harvard, they're going to have different hooks. I would say these are the most typical hooks across most institutions. Does your sibling go there? When I say go there, I mean is enrolled while you will be there. If they graduated before you, it doesn't impact as much. Legacy, parent or grandparent. VIP, of course, if you donate a bunch of money as parents, like that can have an impact. First generation college student certainly has been a big push at a lot of schools across the country. Females in underrepresented STEM areas like biology doesn't count, right? But like physics, chemistry, math, engineering, all those areas can be really impactful for females. And then if you offer any geographic diversity, that can be impactful as well. And all of those, as Lisa noted, all of those categories are scored in my algorithm and they translate to what you see on the other side of the screen, which is admit rate categories. So
Mm.
you'll see later on, certain scores will identify to me that the student should be applying to schools with less than 5% acceptance rates, which you see as category 1, like Harvard, or 5 to 10%, like Cornell, 10 to 20, like Emory, et cetera, going through. And so the algorithm is designed to give the students an idea of where they should be focusing their apps. That said, I just want to say that this is, admissions decisions are part art and part science. And this is much science, like trying to quantify this. And it's not taking into account things like the quality of the execution, right? Like we don't know anything about the personal statement, supplemental essays, activity list. So this is really
How
kind of
you
giving you an
weave these
idea.
things in, how masterfully you weave these things into a college essay. How does it
Exactly.
come across? Yeah.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
And the final
Absolutely.
thing is the school fit score at the bottom. And we'll talk about that
Yes.
later, but I grade each individual human being as like, this is where you should be applying, admit rate range. And then they give me their list of schools that they want to apply to. And I let them know based upon what I know, is it safe? Is it a target? Is it a risky target? Is it reach? Is it non-competitive, et cetera?
Okay. Okay. So, so helpful. So much information here. I'm already seeing some questions. If you have a question, please put it in the Q&A and I'll try to, weave it into the conversation so it gets answered live, or worst case, we'll answer it by typing it in. I think this is a great time to answer this question here because we get asked this so often about volunteering. So, is the subject of volunteering also in the application? There's a lot of misinformation about this. And I think part of this has to do with how college admission has changed since I applied, since you applied, since most parents of teenagers applied. When we were applying, it was all about being well-rounded and having and showing that you were a member of the community, which means just packing your schedule with volunteer opportunities to show that you were a good person, you were a good citizen, and you were, interacting in the community. And while it's still important to do volunteer work, it's the and it's still important to be well-rounded in some ways, but that's less important on the college application right now. So how would you talk about volunteering, that question, John, about volunteering?
Yeah, you're great point. A lot of misinformation about this.
Yeah.
One of the first presentations I gave, my mom joined. She's like wanted to listen to me. So she listened and she called me afterwards and she said, John, that was great. But I don't think you should tell people that volunteering doesn't matter so much. Like volunteering is so important to the community. And I agree, volunteerism is important to the community, but as it relates to college admissions, it's not that important unless the A activity that you're
Really
engaging in
important. This is a
volunteerism.
big change from when we applied.
Yes.
I feel like I
Yes.
should like highlight it. Yeah.
Yes. If the
Yeah.
volunteerism is an activity that supports the goal in any way, it could be motivational, it could be,
Yes.
feet on the ground, it could be investigatory. If it connects in any way, it works. If it doesn't connect, what I say to families
To
is
the
that,
prospective major, right?
correct,
Basically is
to the
what we're
prospective
saying.
major.
Yeah. If
Exactly.
it connects to your prospective major in a very, very clear way that you've articulated.
Yes, then it matters. And then the question is, how much does it matter? Well, is it based on hours or is it based on something else? It's not based on hours. I mean, you could argue that if you get the Presidential Service Award for all those hundreds of hours, that someone values that. I would say the lower tier schools do, and they will give you sometimes even scholarships for it. But the Ivy League, Ivy-like
Good to
schools
know.
don't for the most part.
Yeah. Yeah. Another good question to answer now, I think, before we move on to the application review is, are tests really optional, or do schools get suspicious if not submitted?
They're suspicious. There's no question about that. And I think the evidence is you're seeing a lot of schools go back to the standardized test. I live in Pennsylvania by Lehigh University, where I worked before Cornell, and Lafayette College is right by me. If any of you have heard of Lafayette, it's a great school. They went test optional a long time ago. And then a couple years later, the faculty literally revolted and said, like, no, we want the test back. The quality of the students is weaker. So I think that, standardized tests are generally considered problematic for accessibility for underrepresented students. And so sometimes schools are feeling the pressure to get rid of tests so they can increase diversity. But in the end, if you're a majority applicant, it's a bad decision to not take the test. You should take it, prep as much as you can. And if it doesn't work out, there are more options than there ever have been to be successful at top tier schools, but you're limiting your choices quite a bit.
Right, right. And this issue of standardized tests and equity is such an interesting one, right? I'm sure I've seen the latest studies come out showing that unfortunately what getting rid of the standardized test did is actually increase the equity gap, because students were still a lot of reasons. A lot of reasons. I can share the article. I can share articles with you
I
guys
believe that's
after,
true.
but
Having worked in college admissions, I believe that is
yeah,
the case.
yeah, you can really tell who's getting the tutoring, meaning who can afford the tutoring and all of those kinds of issues. Um, do first cousins count as siblings?
No.
Unfortunately, no. I mean, you should still mention it in your college application, but it's not up there in the blue area, right?
Not in the blue area. For siblings,
Yeah.
sometimes we've
Or
even had
sorry,
our
or in the orange
siblings.
area.
Yeah, and sorry, you're right, in the orange. Sometimes
Mhm.
sibling can be really powerful because like the student is literally there, and we often have a variety of strategies to get that sibling contact to be more impactful. Cousins or anything else they're just not going to give as much attention to.
Yeah. We have some very specific questions here, and I'm going to read them because they're good questions, but I think unless John feels differently, it's like a depends if, and we have to know so much more about your student, but great questions. So we're seeing which schools consider students with top grades, but no awards. And I would say that's every school, actually.
Yeah, awards are not necessary. Grades are the bar of entry, but then you need the A activities.
Right. And then a question about if your test score isn't quite as high as the average accepted test score, but major focus part of the tests, so in other words, English, are strong. So if your English is really strong and you're applying for English, I think that's that to me is a question that we have to know a lot more about the student and where you're applying.
I would say most of the time, if you're close to the average test score, you should probably put it in there because the reader's assuming something lower if you don't put it in there.
Okay. Do colleges have any preference SAT versus ACT? No, they
No.
do not. Okay, great. All right, we are going to move on because it's 6:33 and we have so much to talk about. All right, should we look at some applications? I really hope we'll have time for three.
Yes.
All right, let's do
Do you
it.
think I should show the comment? Should I do a quick overview of the Common App or should I jump right into?
You could, yeah. If you can just do it in a couple of minutes, that'd be great.
Yeah, okay, I'll do it quickly.
So John's going to show the actual form, the Common App, if any of you have not seen it, just so you see what all the sections look like. And then when we review the applications, we're actually going to show them as a Word document, because if we show an actual student's Common App, like printed as a PDF, it would, everything would be blacked out. Like we would have to black out in order to of course, make sure to keep the student's anonymity and be fair to that student. So that's the way we did it. We stuck it all in a Word document.
Yeah, at the bottom of every single Common App page, they have like the seed number of the high school. There's like all this identifying information. And it's just like,
Yeah.
If you can just stop the share, it won't let me do the share and I'll share
Of
my screen.
course.
Okay, so I think you're seeing right now is just the actual Common App itself. I just created a login just so we could very briefly talk through the different sections. You can see that when you sign in, we're on this tab right here. It says Common App. There's also a tab here. It says My Colleges, right? And so I just put Cornell in here. If you click on Cornell, this is where all the information, the work that you need to do related to Cornell is, right? You can see there's a writing supplement. They have college questions. Those are different than the writing supplement. And then it's just saying that you are requiring the personal essay. So just so you're aware, when you go into the Common App, there's the My Colleges, and that's all the institutional specific stuff. And then you have the Common App itself. On the Common App itself, you can see the first page here is profile. This is just all demographic information. Nothing to note here. Name, address, contact details. I would just say that you want to put a cell phone number if you're the student that you will pick up if you get waitlisted, because that's who they call. That's the number they call. Demographics, obviously, you're going to put in the, whatever demographic categories you fall under. Language doesn't really matter. Geography and nationality, and if you have a fee waiver. So I would say that there's nothing really of interest there. Family information. This has a little bit of impact. You'd be surprised. I remember when I was applying to college, my dad is a lawyer. I remember thinking like, oh, my dad's a lawyer. They'll think I'm smart because he's a lawyer. I really thought that as a high school student. And actually what they think is, oh, your dad's lawyer, you have more access to resources. And so the bar is higher for you, right? That's really the honest truth. So sometimes parents will ask me like, do I need to put all these things down? Like, put down what's accurate, but you don't need to like show off there because you might actually be making it harder for your child. Education, this is, yeah, it's a little tidbit there. Education, this is, you're going to be self-reporting a bunch of stuff, your grades and all that stuff. I would say that, again, most of this stuff is irrelevant because the colleges are going to go in and look at your transcript and chart it. You can say what GPA you have. They don't care. They're going to look at your transcript, right? So like weighted GPA, unweighted GPA, I say just put down the highest. They're not really paying attention to this anyway. Where did you take classes, other universities, etc. The one thing I will note here is actually future plans. This comes up a lot as a problem for students. They will put down like, I want to go to medical school. And then the rest of the app has nothing to do with that. And now there's this kind of incongruent message. Like they said one thing on the Common App, but then on the essays, not even mentioned. Make sure those two things match because that will be a problem if they don't. Testing is just where you put your standardized test, your activities. As a reminder, you get 10 spots on the activity list and you get 150 characters, like a tweet, basically, to describe your engagement. And we want to try our best to stay away from telling you what the activity is, right? Like we know that what newspaper club is. We want to understand what contribution you made or what perspective you have on it. And then finally, the writing. This is just the personal statement. And you can see that there are a bunch of prompts, but one of the prompts is basically just write on whatever topic you so choose. So we really use the prompts as ways to think about the topic that we've already identified. Each prompt might push the essay in a little bit different direction, but we aren't forced into these prompts because one of them is just write on whatever topic you so choose. Okay, that was really it for Common App. Just a very, very brief overview of the different sections. Anything that you feel like I missed there, Lisa, or needs more
No, I think
explanation?
this is great. There's obviously a lot more to talk about, but we don't have time for everything.
Right. Okay, so what I did is I took this young lady, her name is Madison. Madison applied to NYU Stern. The reason I did NYU Stern is that it's a highly competitive school. There's NYU is a very unique place that, the Arts and Sciences College is not nearly as, or the liberal college that they have, it's not nearly as competitive as Stern. And I had two students that were relatively similar
So Stern is the
backgrounds.
business school at
Yes,
NYU,
good
which
point.
is more
Sorry,
prestigious. Yeah, no.
exactly.
Mhm.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is just very briefly kind of run through this. I'm going to talk relatively fast because I know we have a lot to get through, and just give you a quick overview of what I see when I see this app. So you can see number one, student had a 35 ACT, only took it once, which is noted in the app. I would say if you're applying to Stern, NYU, you are above average there, and you start with an advantage. Noted here, the GPA, I just noted really not relevant. You have to look at the transcript, but that was representative of the GPA. It was mostly distribution of mostly A's and I think one or two B's on the transcript. See, AP exam, student had that at the time the student was applying had taken 4, right? So senior year classes, you don't have AP exams because that happens at the end. So we had 4 scores that were noted, a 5 and 2 and 3 4s. I would say this looks about standard for what you'd see at NYU. I don't think this helps or necessarily hurts the student. Honors and awards, you can see the student identified 2. There are only 5 spots that you can possibly identify there, and it's very limited in how, I think it's 50 characters or somewhere around there. You can see president of Teens Against Drunk Driving, captain of the soccer team. I noted here mostly inconsequential. I mean, those things are not going to move the needle in any meaningful way. And I would say, honestly, many of the honors or awards that I see aren't overly important. Even the one that we'll talk about later of the student who admitted to the Ivy League, the awards and honors were not over the top impressive. And then future business plans, I just put there. That's from the Common App, and the student identified business owner, and that connects to the school, right? I'm applying to Stern. That makes sense, not a problem. Now, if he had applied to NYU Arts and Sciences and put business owner there, that would be a problem. They'd almost immediately identify that as,
Mm.
inconsistent. Okay, then you have the NYU supplemental questions. Now, this is not the supplemental essay. These are the questions that NYU asks about how you want to engage with their institution. So the first one is, do you want to apply to the New York campus or some of the other campuses, Abu Dhabi, et cetera? Please be aware that some of the campuses are way easier and New York is obviously harder than any of the abroad campuses. This student chose New York. They applied to Stern because in our process, one of the first things we always talk about is college type. So the students, and
Mhm.
that's what NYU was asking. Are you applying to the business school, the arts school, or the engineering school? And so the student identified the business school. And then on the Common App, there is no major identification because that Common App goes to every school you apply to. So they're just saying, what do you want to do in the future? The majors are coming from the schools, and that's on the NYU supplement itself. And they're saying, what's your primary area of study? And this student chose business, technology, and entrepreneurship. So I'll just flip over to the other one that we're going to compare it to just to kind of look at the same things. You can see this student applied optional, so there was no SAT score in this instance. Actually, the reason for that is because the student really did quite poorly on the SAT, and we could not get that up. Student had 3.79 GPA. You can see compared to 3.86, pretty similar. This student took no AP exams because they went to an IB high school. Just to check, if you guys do go to IB high schools or if you go to a private school that doesn't have AP, you really do need to check with your college counselor to know whether or not the other students in prior years have set a bar of entry by taking the exams, even though they don't need to. Like this counselors say you don't have to if it's an IB school or a private school, but the students don't believe them and they go take it. And then it's like 10 students from one high school have AP exams and the others don't, and you don't want to be in the position where you don't. And then you can see this student identified 3 awards. Again, I would say all inconsequential. Scholar with distinction doesn't really mean anything. Most improved soccer team means nothing. MVP tennis team doesn't mean anything really. And then student identified future plans as undecided. If you don't know exactly how to answer that question, undecided is fine. That's the Common App. No one's even looking at it unless it looks wrong compared to the rest of the app. Okay, we'll go back to the first one. Now we get to the Common App activity list. So this student, obviously, as we noted here, applying business, technology, entrepreneurship. We talked about the PA.G.E acronym: perspective, activity, goal, ethos. And so the first question I'm asking is, does this A activity, you can see the first one, founder, owner of a clothing reselling business, does that A activity support the G goal? And I would say, yeah, I mean, we're talking about business, technology, entrepreneurship, and the student, I think that connects to the goal. And then we have a few things noted here. The first thing is student said sold thousands of dollars worth. And I would just note that here the student's putting the value of what they did on how many dollars they raised. And I would say generally that's not a good idea, mostly because if you raise a lot, they think you're a privileged kid. If you don't raise anything, they think you didn't do anything. So it's kind of a lose-lose situation there. And then you can see here the student noted that they reached broader audiences via online marketing, but they don't actually tell us anything about marketing, how, what platforms, no perspective really identified there. Second one, and I won't go through all of these, but you can see startup. Does it
So
support the
interesting because, I think what's important to note is that this person did the work, you know,
Oh, yeah.
so sold thousands of dollars, reached broader audiences, online marketing tactics. That's so cool, but we don't have any. And yeah, you're right. Like that could mean so many things. Which tactics? And there's not a ton of space, but we want to know more.
Yeah. Like maybe,
Because anybody can sort of say that, but what's their perspective? What's their why? There's color missing there.
yeah. And I met the student after they submitted this app, and I found
Yeah.
out that their online marketing tactics were a lot built around the idea of like organic, like, how you can get like all the moms to start to support a product kind of organically if you have a great product and you put it in there. So that was
Oh,
his thing, was
that's
to
so
kind of like,
cool.
yeah,
Yeah,
but he didn't tell us, and so no one
right.
knows, which is a missed opportunity there.
Yeah,
Same thing here, really. Startup is pretty cool. He shows a little personality / problem identification. Returning clothes is annoying. So I did something. And he created an AI-based virtual try-on clothing software. And I think that's, again, is interesting. It's the A supports the G. There's a little personality and there's a technology solution to the problem. Not a bad description there. It could have maybe a little bit more perspective, but not bad. And then you have another project intern experience here. The student, again, illustrated a technological solution to a problem, starting to get a theme about technology and solutions to a problem, which, not a bad idea because business, technology, entrepreneurship, not doing a
yes,
bad job there. Worked at Brooks Brothers. Again, here, this feels very resume oriented to me, organized and managed suit and shirt department, worked in sales. Doesn't really tell me anything about what they learned, how they grew, etc. So, doesn't really do much there.
right.
World history teacher, that A doesn't support the G really. Now, it doesn't mean that every activity has to support the goal. You can play soccer and dance and swim, but, identification, number 5 on your activity list, generally you would hope is still kind of connected to the goal. That one is not. Soccer also not supporting the goal. Here he does show a little bit of personality by saying, I organize weekly practices and conditioning. Unfortunately, I don't know if that's the personality you want to show, saying you don't want to do it, but that's what he did, and to show a little humor and personality. Soccer team again. Now we have soccer twice. It's kind of not really doing too much more than the first one. So you kind of wasted space there. He tries to use a little personality by saying, I will forever remember training in the rain. A little personality here too, where he talks about this, the way he was teaching students and how he's scarred by having to explain the same thing over and over. Again, not really connected to the goal. And then the last one here, team rocketry, not really connected to the goal. And so, the first 4, not too bad. The final 5 not really very good. Then we have the personal
Mm.
statement. This young man, or this young lady, that is, had cancer. And, that's a pretty big obstacle to overcome in high school. And so that in many ways does start you in an advantaged position. If you've overcome being diagnosed with cancer in high school, the reader generally is going to relate to that as well. That's a big obstacle for a young person. So the student just started right there, like, hey, you have cancer. And then here, I won't read through this essay, but basically they say the worst part of
But I would
cancer.
say tread lightly, right? Like this is something where you should check with somebody like John or somebody on John's team, or hopefully if you have a really good college admissions counselor at your school, because not all obstacles are the same. And maybe you've heard like avoid the D's, death, divorce, and it can feel COVID is something that we all went through. So unless you have a really, really specific story that is really gonna set you apart in a major way and show your ethos and perspective in a way that blows our minds. We all went through COVID, and So that's less of a struggle that you want to write about. So writing about a struggle is somewhere where, check with someone who knows before you decide to go that route.
100% true. 'Cause some of the struggles, I've seen overcoming even eating disorders while I was in college admissions, very positive essays where the readers
Mhm.
were thinking about that student negatively. Oh, it's a drain on mental health services. And of course, I don't agree with that, but you never know who's reading your application. And so you got to be aware of the way you present yourself. I think identifying that you had cancer, and that would be something I would do. But the
Yeah,
first
for
thing the
sure.
student does is says, the worst part of it is I was forcibly sidelined from soccer, which maybe could work. But as you go through the rest of the essay, you basically get to the point where you realize that, he's really upset that he can't play soccer, kind of this negative reflection of like, wow, of course the student was feeling pretty upset about not being able to play, but
Right.
there's not a
But you're
whole lot being
using so
said.
many valuable, like these words, you only have 650 of them, and they're each one is like a piece of gold, a diamond, platinum. What's the most expensive thing? And so to use those words to express how bummed you were, you're not telling the audience anything incredible about your ethos and your perspective, which is what you want to do here.
Exactly.
If there was some way that you overcame that and to show how unique you are, we want to learn about you.
100%. And then when he finally does do exactly what you're noting, which is a perspective change, he says, for the first time in weeks, I forgot about the doctors, which is great, except
Mm,
that it's really based on his dad comes in and he tells him about these jerseys. And so like it's just kind of like this small perspective change. And then he explains it all and he tells about how he dives into a brand new activity. But when you think about what he's actually saying here, he's saying that, I found something else interesting outside of soccer. That's all he really says. He doesn't explain the why behind it, what's interesting, what are the connections. None of that's really there. It's just, I found
right.
something else.
How is this related to your goal? Right? How,
Yeah.
yeah. Hmm.
Yes. He tries to actually here connect it to his goal. He says
Okay.
each setback, whether in obtaining a jersey or receiving medical updates, becomes a lesson, and he says that the
Mm-hmm.
diagnosis was out of his control and that he's going to focus on things he can control and give a sense of agency. And that's not bad, but there's just not enough depth and reflection for us to really believe that he feels the sense of agency. Like when your dad comes in and says, "Hey, have you ever thought about this?" And then you kind of dive in, but don't really tell us how far it got. Did you start a business? Did you start sharing with others? None of that happens in the essay. So it falls kind of flat. And then he kind of just notes at the end, I find strength in knowing that I can respond to my circumstances however I so choose, except that in the only example he gives is I'm not responding well. My dad shows me an example and then I dive in. There's no other example where he's the motivating factor for finding the new outlet, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then NYU has one supplemental essay. They ask this question basically to either identify one of their quotes or pick one of your own quotes and tell us why NYU and why you basically. The student chose
Mhm, mhm.
a
And
quote from Pele.
I'll use this opportunity to butt in and say I've been answering a lot of questions live, hopefully, or sorry, typing. And I wanted to talk about when I answered. Someone asked about preparing these questions in advance before 12th grade, the supplemental questions. Can you find the supplemental questions for each university online? And the answer is yes, but actually the schools as of late have been changing their questions year to year. So that's relatively new. They used to be the same every year, but now they're changing. So maybe you want to wait for the schools to release their questions this year. John, is that in
Yeah, I
line with
agree. I
what you
mean,
think?
there's probably
Yeah,
only like 10 or 12 different categories of questions. So you can practice a little, but you're not going to write the specific question for that specific in school until
we don't
after
recommend
August
that.
1.
Yeah,
Yeah,
August 1 is when the
August
Common App
1.
opens. Mhm.
Exactly. And no, and this essay honestly is pretty similar. He picks a quote from or she picks a quote from a soccer player. I'm thinking the other student,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
she talks through a little bit about how soccer is a sanctuary and how important it is. And then there's a little bit of engagement on the idea that there's a language. That's what Pele says about the language of uh, and a universal dialect, but there's no depth in explaining what that is or how it actually functions in the student's life. And so I would say not a bad, it's not a bad, it's a well-written essay, but it doesn't say anything about the goal. It's really not connected to, it doesn't really show us much perspective. And the activity of soccer is something we knew a lot about the student in advance of reading this essay. So it doesn't really move the needle too much. And then last thing was the common application additional information section. There's a section there on the Common App that's for additional information. The
Okay,
student
this is something
left it
also I
blank.
want to, like, I wish I could put a highlighter over, the speech bubbles as John is speaking, but this person is leaving an entire section blank, and you would be shocked to know how many students do this. This section, you can write up to 650 words, right,
Yep,
John?
650 words. Yep, exactly.
Unbelievable. Nothing. And I'm nothing, the student didn't do anything wrong. It's amazing how many college counselors at schools tell you that's okay. If you don't have anything, leave it blank. It's
Mhm.
really, really common, but we think it's another place to put these gold nuggets, right? You have
Absolutely.
650 more gold nuggets to use.
And you don't even necessarily need new content. Like, right here, uh, I started a business. Like we'd love to know more about the online marketing tactics, right? But
Right.
they didn't tell us that. So there was an opportunity for them to kind of tell us more about those things. Now, I wouldn't just make stuff up. The additional information section, like you don't want to write another essay about soccer down there, but if it's relevant to the academic goal, yeah, like we want to learn more.
Yeah,
Okay, so before I tell you the answer to the question of whether the student was admitted, they did some things well. They did some things not so well. I think from a
definitely.
academic perspective, like, they're
Impressive.
yeah, they're in a reasonable spot to be successful.
Yeah.
The student here, the second one, very similar. You can see also plays soccer and tennis,
Okay.
undecided.
So now we're
Um,
looking at another I know people are like popping in and out, or some people are joining. We're starting to look at another NYU Stern Business School application.
yes,
Right?
exactly.
A second one.
Applied
Okay.
to the exact same aspect of the program, business, technology,
Okay.
and entrepreneurship. So you can see the student A activities. The question is, do these A activities support the G goal? Yes, it does. Yes, it does. Yes, it does. Yes, it does. What you'll see as we start to get down further is not really, not really, not really. Now, if the A activity does not support the G goal, well, it generally matters less, unless we can do something in the description to either show some personality or show a relevant perspective. And so you can see here, like, I won't belabor the point of the ones that are obvious, like collaborated with local international teams, fostering community empowerment. This story was all about the idea of, you'll see as we go through the essays, it was the idea that sustainable solutions require communication and require strategy and require, intentionality. And so you can see that this is about collaborating with people and fostering a sense of community and empowerment. It kind of fits. And you can see a perspective here, the perspective that
Hmm.
diverse community talents need to be empowered, right? Like that you need to empower people to do things. If they feel, even if they're talented and they have perspectives, if they don't feel empowered to share, that they're not going to do it. So you see a perspective that's being leveraged there.
Yeah. Good verbs.
Yeah. The next one, investigated hydroponics as a sustainable agricultural method. Again, this is, an activity built around sustainable solutions, and you'll see a lot of sustainability as a common theme across all of the activities. The
Yes.
student volunteered at a farm, and you might not think that's connected to technology and business, but when you're talking about sustainability and you're talking about implementation of initiatives under business, it kind of works. And you'll see through the essays later on that that's kind of what he was doing here. Um, Organizational vision enhances our chance of meeting our collective goals. Again, kind of this statement about his perspective on how setting clear vision across the organization is the only way to actually move the organization forward. Here, construction worker, right? Like, is this important? Well, here he decides to go with a little bit of humor. This young man is very nice young man, but he really wasn't overly engaged when I met him. These things were less important to him. We made them important as we worked with him. But we had to fill the rest of the activity list with things that he does that are not really A activities that support the G goal. And so, because we worked with him for a relatively short period of time. And so you can
Right.
see what we did here, right here. Waking at 4 a.m. was less than ideal, a little personality humor, but observing the realization of our goals for enhanced infrastructure was amazing. Here I'm a dorm moderator, right? Celebrated diversity, strengthened our collective resilience. Here he's on the school cheer team.
So he's relating it back, constantly relating it back to, oh, this is what I want to study at NYU. And this is how all the things I did actually do affect my perspective as relates to
Exactly.
that major. Yeah. I see that.
Exactly. Pseudo cheerleader, right? This is about galvanizing support, getting people excited about what they're doing. Here, repetition creates consistency. Consistency provides the opportunity for creativity, drills for days. Again, little personality, a little perspective.
Yeah.
Tennis team captain generally doesn't matter. But when you say something like this, it can move the needle a little bit. It makes you feel like the
Mhm.
student has a perspective that matters.
Yeah.
And this one probably is the least important, but adrenaline junkie for 115 path down the mountain, landed my vaunted 360-degree spin, 1 out of every 3 tries. Ouch. Again, little personality, little humor. You get the
Yeah.
sense.
I like this activity list because I feel like I know him.
Yeah,
I
you
feel
get
like
a
I got
sense.
to know him.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So this is by far, this is not like an ideal activity list. The activities could be better and more connected to the G goal, but you work with what you have, and the student did a good job of we created an ethos we'll show you at the end and kind of making
Mm.
that permeate. Common App personal statement I'll go through real quickly. The student was applying from abroad, from Switzerland, and basically during the pandemic, the student got stopped at the border and had never expected this. So they get this letter expecting that they will be fine. He says every international traveler knows the drill. You land, you go through customs, blah, blah, blah. But that day the routine was broken. And he explains that, basically he's deported and his heart
Oh my
plummets and
gosh.
he's upset and, it's
A nightmare.
embarrassing. And
Yeah.
he says, the hours that follow are imprinted in my memory. Of course, how terrible it was. And then he talks, then now you start to kind of see, he says, my subsequent days were a blur filled with virtual schooling, right? So it's this slight negative impact post event. But now we start to get to the change, right? The student says that the ordeal thrust him into a real world crash course on privilege, global policies, and empathy. You get a little reflection that broadens out now compared to his own experience. He says, I began reflecting on larger global issues, fragmented families, unrealized dreams, blah, blah, blah. Now he comes over and he starts to reflect again, broadened out about his community. He says, this is at his school. He says, and while they may have been unaware of the deportation ordeal, it struck me that they may be oblivious to the personal and systemic challenges they encountered, right? So he's saying the people in his community, they didn't experience what he had, right? And so they might be oblivious to what's happening. The idea that experience matters, right? Then he starts to leverage his new perspective. I recognize the invaluable diversity because he's saying my diversity wasn't valued, right? Now all of a sudden it's obvious that diversity is valuable to him. And he's saying, I need to make it important. So there's 22 boys. They're from 14 different nationalities and 6 different religions. There's value here. And then the student says, we were able through our engagement, right? We were able to acknowledge the value of each other. And then he says, hey, and we played some video games. At the end, he makes a statement, like kind of the ethos statement, as an environmentalist venturing into hydroponics, the skewed global distribution of resources is more than a fact. It's his lived reality, right? He's seen it, and you'll see that in the rest of his app. And then he basically says, my aspirations are to work in an inclusive future where people can work together to develop a more equitable, compassionate world. And so that kind of fits the context of what you see in the activity list, leveraged through a personal experience that meant something to him. And I think the reader generally would believe it. Okay, then you get to the NYU supplement and you can see he chose a quote that I think was pretty much on point for his application: coming together as a beginning, keeping together as progress, working together as success, from Henry Ford. And he really kind of dives into this, I think, pretty strongly. He gives a great perspective, transformative power of unity in pursuit of common goals. He's saying that unity matters and there's transformational power to having a shared vision, basically. Here he talks about how witnessing something is different than hearing about something, right? And so he's talking about how experience matters. Here he talks about his perspective that you can be an individual and do a great job, but individual heroics don't really generally create huge impacts. It requires some level of community. Here you can see he talks about that humans have a great deal of potential, but in order for us to meet that potential, we need to provide the essentials for growth, which are security, right? And housing and water, and that we're never going to realize our humanity potential if we don't provide that type of support to communities. Here he starts to jump into a little bit about why NYU is the right school for him. And one of the things I liked here was very clear goal statement. The student says, I want to work with others to develop and implement sustainable technological solutions to primary resource challenges. And one of the things I like at the very end is the student says, I'm committed to not only furthering my own skills, but now he's talking about what he's going to do for others. but supporting and challenging others in the community to envision, pursue, and achieve community valuable solutions. This essay is way more on point as it relates to the activity list, and I think leverages the quote significantly better as a whole. Then you get to the common application in additional information section, and you can see the student, first of all, they categorized and classified. So the first thing they have is agricultural challenges research. And you see they did research on solving food insecurity and agricultural challenges with hydroponics, and they put the specific abstract into the additional information section. Then this was hands-on experience. This is often the motivation, the volunteerism, if you will. This was his volunteerism. It didn't seem that important to me until we started to build the whole thing around it, right? Now it's connected to the goal, and so it matters. And so this student this is in the activity list, of course, but the student decided, no, that's not enough. I need to say more about this because this is a fundamental piece of my story. And so they wrote a great deal, honestly, like almost like another essay. Then the student was volunteering on a farm. Again, this is volunteerism. It works because the A supports the G, and there's a very clear perspective here about bringing people through with sustainability and shared vision and the intersection of that happened on the farm. Okay, so we got these two students. I think I probably gave away the answer here, but
I know we should have done a poll.
Yeah, from a statistical perspective, you could argue that the student number one with a pretty strong ACT score, higher GPA, AP exams, you could argue that they start in an advantaged position as compared to student number two who applied optionally, which is generally not ideal, a little lower GPA, no AP exams. Neither of them have any awards of any consequence. But this student, the first one, was refused outlaw. And this is a student that had cancer. If you have cancer and you were engaged, you started a business, you have a 35 ACT, you should get in. Like that, this is a missed opportunity. Like that student should have gotten in. And would have
That's
gotten
just because of the way that she wrote the application.
Yeah, definitely. 100%. And this student, you could argue the student shouldn't get in. You have optional SATs, right? You have no AP exams. There's no real awards here, but this student really did leverage an ethos. And so you can see here, hopefully you guys see this. I know I went through this very quickly, but the student was accepted. And this is the ethos statement that we wrote for the student in advance. As captain of my soccer team, I have long been aware that success hinges on effectively uniting and leveraging our diverse talents and experiences toward shared goals. But it wasn't until I began working with the Chem Foundation, that's the volunteerism, in Tanzania, to bring running water and electricity to impoverished community that I became aware of that, and now we have a perspective. Enhancing our ability to develop shared vision and communication. I became aware that enhancing our ability to develop shared vision and communication, shared vision is not simply about winning and losing. It is foundational to meeting our human potential, to achieving sustainable change, and to assuring our survival. Now, we didn't write that anywhere, but that statement was the backbone of every activity list description, if it made sense, of every essay, if it made sense. And that was leveraged well by the student, and the student got into schools that they shouldn't have gotten into because of the consistency and the leveraging of the ethos across the app. Does that make sense to you, Lisa?
Oh my gosh, of course, of
You
course.
see what
And I know that this is such a crux of our system. And sometimes, students are hesitant to start with this ethos statement because they're like, oh, I don't know, I don't
Yep.
know what I stand for. I don't really know what I believe in, like lots of things, I have opinions about a lot of things, but just verbalizing that. And for those of you who have worked in marketing or know anything about marketing, this is really like creating your mission statement for a brand or coming up with your brand values. And you can't really do anything until you know that, why are you here? What are you doing? Who are you? What do you plan to do in the future? And kind of putting that in a statement, creates the bones of this application. And interestingly, you don't write that anywhere, but you kind of come back to it and say, right, okay, it helps you write every piece of this to kind of go
100%.
back to that mission,
Yes. And I think
or your elevator pitch or whatever, right? There's so many good words for it and in the marketing lingo.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And maybe it'll be more obvious now. I'll show you. This is a student from this past year, but will be going to
Oh,
college.
you gave it away at the beginning this time. Accepted.
Yeah, well, this is the Ivy League example, right? And this is a well-developed application.
Right.
This student was admitted to Dartmouth and Cornell and Duke and Brown. I'll note here the first that we created an ethos statement. You can see this, it's pretty simple. I've always loved investigating how policies impact our lives. And then something happens, but it wasn't until, and the student was investigating congressional redistricting. But it wasn't until I investigated congressional redistricting that I began to understand, and now there's this new perspective, that effective policy development and implementation is only possible when we actively engage and educate stakeholders. Now that's our
Mhm.
statement, and we want to build around it. And you'd be surprised, right? Like this student also, I think, played soccer, right? Are there you won't see it on the activity list, but uh,
No.
does this statement apply to soccer? Yes, it does. It might not seem it, right? But like, are there stakeholders in soccer? Yeah, there's the players, there's the coach, there's the booster club, right? There's all these different people that are part of that. And so this student is saying that if we want to change something, right? Maybe we want to change our, the way we function as a soccer team, the only way to do that is to engage and educate the people that matter within the context of the decision. Okay, so that's our
Right.
foundation.
So I just want to stop for a second and say two things about this ethos statement. One is maybe people are wondering, like, how is this high school student investigating congressional redistricting? That sounds like something an adult with a master's degree should do, and that's true. But and this is something that we can follow up on after this if you have questions about this. But we really encourage our students to do independent projects, and a lot of those projects are research driven, because it helps you develop a perspective. It helps you get college ready. In college, you have to do a lot of reading, synthesize a lot of information, develop a perspective, write essays, and we really feel that doing research helps with all that. Some students are lucky in that they have research opportunities in their school. Grab them, do them, definitely. Some people I take like a research class over the summer. A lot of the pre-college programs at universities, some of them have research that's part of that. If you haven't done one of those kinds of opportunities, reach out. We do have research mentors, so PhD fellows generally, or those who already are PhDs at research universities who can help high schoolers kind of come up, well, we would help you come up with a topic and investigate it in a way that's a high schooler's level, but helps them get college ready. So super, this is an important thing to think about. And if you are an 11th grader, you still have time before submitting your applications next year to do some of your own research that has to do with your ethos and your goal. So happy to, John and I are happy to chat more about this specifically after the webinar. The other thing I will say is that we have some questions here about dual majors or dual track in high school, which it could mean a couple of things. I think these people are asking about, like, if you're at a school that's an art school, or a school that's a music school, or you're dancing while you're in school, so you're doing these kind of pre-professional things that maybe don't have as many APs. And I think this ethos statement and the way that John talked about, okay, well, his this person's soccer taught him some of these important values, and so the sports, or the team dynamics, or there are things that unless you're going to dance professionally in college, which is that's a whole other type of application, or you're applying for some kind of conservatory. If you're not, then what you have to do is take your other talents and your activities, your leadership, things that you've learned from being on a team, from being in a competitive environment, from having to wake up at 4 o'clock every morning to practice. And those are the things that have changed your perspective or have affected your ethos, that then connect to the goal. So you can make it one of your activities.
Exactly. And one of the things that you noted, Lisa, I think about like research programs and whether that's out of school or in school, the key is the question. Really, the question itself is the most important part. And so some of the research programs, they're fine. The issue I run into is that they like to have limited question development, so they can have like a group of people doing with one mentor, So
Oh,
they
right.
limit the
Yes, I've
question
heard
a little
about that.
bit. And the second thing I'll just note is that, yes, investigating congressional redistricting might sound like a big thing, but like, what actually happened? Well, they were literally redrawing the congressional district lines where the student lived.
Yeah.
And the student said, they literally in a conversation, he said like, who is part of that? Because the student was Asian and said that they thought the lines were being drawn in a way that was kind of cutting off part of where Asian people lived. And
Mm-hmm.
and I said like, okay, let's just draft a question about it. Like, who is involved in redistricting conversations? Who should be involved in redistricting conversations? He goes off, interviews a bunch of people, finds out what the process looks like. And he comes back and says, you know what? They're not checking with anybody that actually matter. Like the residents have no clue what the lines
Right.
are and where they're being drawn.
Not
That's the
surprised.
ethos
Yeah.
statement.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah,
So it's just about being curious, actually.
that's it. That's
Yeah.
really it. Yeah. You can see the student, in regards to the award section, the student was admitted to a lot of great schools. We put 5 down. None of them
Mm-hmm.
are overly impressive. Like the New York Scholars Program finalist, I did this for my team, all my counseling team. And I said that just so you know, most readers don't know the relative value of these accomplishments. Like they don't know how many people are in this outstanding county award. No one knows what that is or what did you get it for. And there's no room to really describe it. Here you can see this is a team competition. So it's really very difficult to ascribe individual value to teams. So it probably didn't do anything. This League of Women Voters Service Award, I think, was nice actually, because this did kind of move the needle on engaged citizenship, which is really what his
Mm-hmm.
story is about. And then the last thing here is not an achievement at all. It's a publication of research in a journal, which, isn't exactly what they meant by the award section, but you can be pretty flexible if you have content that kind of works. And so that's what we did there.
Okay, I'm going to use this opportunity to weave one of these questions in here. If you don't have 5 honors or awards, should you list less, or and does that impact your competitiveness?
That's a good question. I think like it's a case by case basis. You don't want to put silly things that make no sense. Like I think that you can get like, all these things, even though this is research, it doesn't really count. Like I think it's fine if you put up, something that's clear. I don't know what
Depends.
I can't give an example, but like I wouldn't put something silly up.
Right, right.
The other thing I'll say about the awards is like if you have an impressive award, like a real impressive award, the reader also probably doesn't understand it and know it. So if you have a real impressive award, you need to contextualize it in the additional information section and say, hey, there were, to the best of your ability, 750
Remember
people
that
and I came
additional
in third.
information section that everybody leaves blank. You have
Yes,
650 words to explain these things. Yeah.
100%. And if you have no
But
idea,
John, if you have 3 honors or awards here.
3's okay. Like you can get to an Ivy League school without having 5 spots filled
Okay.
up. Yeah. It'd be nice if you have 5, but it's not the end of the world.
Okay.
Um, Then you get to the activities. I'm not going to go through all these in detail, but the one thing that's interesting about this student is they literally had 10 A activities that supported the G goal. Now, I don't think that's necessary, but testifier, published research, youth liaison for League of Women Voters, student council, TED Ed Club, peer leaders, model Congress. I love this one. And I really encourage students. How do you
Hmm.
think about impacting your own community? This student literally used to complain about the time school started. And I said to him, doesn't school start the same time for everybody? And he said, no, actually, there's something about his district where he had a different time. And I said, well, why don't you go and see if you can like investigate it? So they made him in charge of the school start time exploration committee. And that is really quite valuable content.
Well,
Board
love
election.
that story.
Yeah. And then, a bunch of volunteerism within the context of election. If you read these descriptions, you would see that there's a lot of P perspectives that are being leveraged. These
Yeah.
were actually the perspectives I made
Not
the
just a
student write.
list. You learn something about the student by reading it.
Yeah, definitely.
Remember, there was that one student, who was weaving in like comical things, like
Right.
obviously had a sense of humor. Yeah, this
Yes.
person's really curious, and yeah, I know a lot about him already.
Yeah. Like this, right away, like he's leading the school start time exploration committee. That's the type of person, like we've all had them as adults in our offices. Like when there's a problem, somebody is going to fix it. This is that student. Like he's going to be
Right,
that person.
right.
Okay, we'll go past this. This is a personal statement. I think he again very much listened to me and he was like, no, 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 I understand this whole ethos thing. I want that to be my
Mhm.
personal statement. So you can see his first
Cool.
statement, what do we benefit from being involved, right? That's like all about engaged citizenship. That's all. And then
Yes.
the rest of his stuff is really A activities to support the G goal. I advocated for congressional redistricting. I compared geopolitical maps on census data. I interviewed state officials to understand legislative perspectives. Those are all A activities to support the G goal of
Right.
engaged citizenship, basically.
But still good writing. Day
Oh, yeah.
of, my palms were sweaty and I could barely eat. You're still showing, you're not telling, you're painting a picture. It's good writing,
Oh, yeah,
right? And there's a
definitely.
story here. You're not just listing brags.
Oh, no, no. There's a real story and there's a real perspective
Yeah.
And his perspective is basically the idea that as a community, we're failing because we need to
Mm.
engage our citizens and they're not being engaged. And so a small group of people are making decisions that are not representative of everybody.
But it doesn't feel negative.
No,
Doesn't feel
no, it's very
like,
positive.
we're failing as a community and that's it. And,
Yep.
right.
100%. Okay, so we'll continue on. I won't belabor this point. So then you have
Somehow
so
it's
this,
already 7:18.
yeah, I see we're behind here. I'm just gonna
No,
skip
it's
to the
okay.
additional
I think
information
I
section.
think I'm loving this. I don't get to see every one of our students. And I'm learning a lot here as well.
Well, this is the additional information section, and a lot of what we talk about is I use the term evidence, I use the term
Yeah.
deliverables, right? Those are things that you can
Yes.
put in the app, and that's what this is. So this is the research the student did. Here's the title, Fostering the Informed Citizen Amid Institutional Struggle. Here's the abstract the student wrote that really is all about the idea that we need to engage our citizens and make them informed if we want to move policy in the right direction for all of us. Here's the link
Right.
to his paper. Here's the journal link. The student really went above and beyond and literally wrote my post-research perspective, not necessary, but he did it.
Right. Just spell it out. You have 650 words.
Exactly. Now this might feel big to students, like here's the video of his testimony. When I say testimony, every single one of you live in a community, very likely in the United States, that has like open forum for city council, county council. That's really what this student did. Like he showed up at a meeting, there was an open forum opportunity, and he got up and spoke, and his mom videotaped him. That's really all that happened here. And then once he did that, he got the transcript. And then once we saw the transcript, we said, well, why don't you write about it? And then he wrote a op-ed about it, to the
In a
local
local
newspaper.
newspaper.
Exactly. And now we get to some more typical stuff. Like he's in student council. Here's a picture of him with the student council body. Here's a social media account that he grew by 200%. Like, does that mean anything? We all know that could be 10 students were engaged. Now it's 22 students, right? Like doesn't really mean anything.
Yes.
But if you kind of put it in the context of everything else here, it feels like he's the type of person who's galvanizing support, engaging
Yeah.
people.
He's a
Here's a picture of
doer.
him pep rally, like why would you put a picture of a pep rally? Well, it kind of fits that type of ethos story that we're building here. So you get the
Right.
point. He put a lot of stuff in here. If you start early and you're intentional, it's really not that hard to build this type of evidence. And
Right.
if you have this type of evidence, here's the school start exploration committee with more content. The story kind of writes itself. These essays write themselves when you have this type of content to build from.
Yeah.
Okay. That's an overview of
Great.
the student admitted pretty much everywhere they applied. Okay. Let me bring up the forms. All right. So I've never done this before. And so the ChanceMe, forgive me if it's a little bit clunky here, but I'm just going to briefly go through the forms,
Okay.
identify things.
So a reminder that when you signed up for this webinar, you had the opportunity, if you wanted, to give us an alias. So not, hopefully not your real name, or at least not a last name, and tell us a bit about yourself. We would use our algorithm to see if what are the chances that you get into your dream school. So it's a bit of a game, right? Everybody is a unique individual with a lot more than is expressed on in these few questions, obviously. But these students wanted to play the game, so we're playing with them.
Yeah, exactly. It's as I was doing this, I kept thinking, "Ooh, I'd love to ask this
Actually
student a
meet
question."
these people.
Yes,
Yeah, because
exactly.
there's so much more color around all of
Yes.
this. Yeah.
But we'll just quickly go through the form. So the first thing I ask students is, tell me what's your best guess of where you are class rank wise. This student actually, I think from high school, identified themselves as a homeschool. So valedictorian may not really play a role. Although I had twins when I was working college admissions. One was the valedictorian, one was the salutatorian, which made me laugh when I saw that from homeschool students. But so that I didn't really give that the same level of value that you might if it was a regular high school. You could see the student took the ACT 35 to 36, really did quite well. Ask what the lowest grade is. Almost all the readers are going to go right to where your lowest grade is.
Quickly scan highest, lowest, move on. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So 91 in ninth grade in bio. I don't imagine that will be too much of a problem. Ninth grade, assuming the grades are going up, like that's not a problem in the least. Prospective major is history. As you saw, one of the things that I'm thinking about in the algorithm is the prospective major. And so that gets graded out. If the student didn't know their prospective major, then I just asked them what areas are you leaning towards? Then we ask about AP curriculum. If you go to an AP high school, a lot of the readers, if you walk into a college, they all say they don't refer to you as a number. But if you walk into a selection committee and it's an AP high school, the reader literally gets up and says, "Hi, this is Lisa," and Lisa's a 0244. Like that's almost ubiquitous. And when I say a 0244, what they mean is you took 0 AP freshman, 2 sophomore, 4 junior, 4 senior. And so they're very much aware of that AP curriculum and what that rigor looks like as compared to what's being offered and taken by other students at the high school. So students took 6 to 8. Contextually, it's harder to understand that because it's homeschooled, right? So it's not as easy to kind of identify exactly what that means. You have a few AP exams here, 4 and 2 5s. The student identified themselves. I asked them to kind of self-identify, how engaged are you? When I say extremely engaged, the student identified themselves that way. I'm saying that they're saying that they have in-school engagement, right? Clubs. They do out-of-school engagement. Maybe they went to a summer program, or maybe they're doing an internship. They've engaged in research, right? Which means that they developed their own question about their area of academic interest. And that after they were done investigating, they shared their information in some way. Maybe they read an article to their school newspaper or something. But we have like kind of 4 different ways in which we describe, quote unquote, extremely engaged. And the student identified themselves that way. You got a national achievement. I didn't really I got a little bit of context, video and written materials of NHD performances, 2-year New York State first prize winner. Gives me a little bit of insight there. Male, Hispanic, ethnicity plays some role. We have citizenship, international, as I said, is harder. Green card or U.S. citizenship is easier. Are you a first-generation college student? The answer was no here. Did your parents graduate from any of the schools? No. Did your siblings go to any of the schools? No. Any unique circumstances? No. Will you be applying for financial aid? That is not part of my algorithm that I actually, but it does have an impact on getting off the wait list. And generally off the wait list is probably the biggest impact. There are some schools that are also need aware. And then I asked them to identify schools that they considered to be reach. So the student identified Columbia and Harvard, then some targets, which NYU, and then some safe schools, Fordham and Rutgers. And so let me pull up the results for this student first, and then we'll kind of go through and talk about the other ones.
Yeah. And my guess, John, would you have a few minutes if we run over here today?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Okay, great. So I've been trying to answer all the questions either by kind of peppering them in or typing out answers, but we have a few more. So at the very end, if you guys who have outstanding questions, if you want to stick around, we'll stay later and answer those.
Yeah. So I'll run through this very quickly. I know I talk too much. You can see here
This is great.
you got Jacob. Jacob is the student that we just went through. And so, the algorithm that I use, basically, that you can see the first thing that is, well, let me just go through real quick how I do it. I won't go through every single one. You can see first, right, grades and class rank. I have some categories, and I will score the students on a score of 1 to 5. And then I have some back end calculations that are being done on the relative value of each of these, right? The grades are not the same value as your prospective major, right? So each one is relative, and you can't really see that here. But so a student gets a 4. I gave the student a 4. Why? Because I can't really give them the top score because of the homeschool dynamic. I don't really know exactly how they're going to be perceived. So I gave them a top 10% high school score. Again, part art, part science, trying to kind of figure out how the reader might see it.
And we haven't seen the student's transcript.
Exactly.
So it could be that they're taking only college level courses or something, and then and that 4 might become a 5. So there's a bit of a game.
So there's a little bit of variability there. And then you see the student identified Harvard, NYU, and Fordham. So I took those 3 schools, and then I asked myself, I say, okay, well, if I'm going to give you a top 10% ranking in a high school, now what does that mean if you apply to Harvard? Does that mean that you are more competitive, significantly more competitive than everyone else, more competitive, similar, less competitive, or not competitive at all? And so at Harvard, I would say that's a little less. If I give you top 10%, maybe the student should be a 5. I'd have to see the transcript. But I would say at Harvard, that's a little bit below what you'd want. You want to be top 5% or less, definitely, if you're applying to Harvard. If you're applying to NYU, I would say that's better, a little better than typical. Top 10%, right around there. I give a 3.5. And Fordham, I would say, is significant, close to significant, between more and significantly more competitive than is typical. So you get a sense of kind of the way I do this, score for the individual, and then score across the institutions, across all those different metrics. And so the results are as follows. The student scores a 114. I know that doesn't mean anything to anyone, but what that actually means, and I'll try to make this a little bigger here, is that 114 score correlates to an admit rate range. So down here, you can see that there's an admit rate categories. If I were to look at the categories over here of the score, you can see 114 is just below the top 5. It's in that category number 1, and it's related to the accept rate range of 5 to 10%. And an example school would be Cornell. So that's what I would be telling the student, like, where should we be applying? I'd be looking at schools that are between 5 and 10% as like the target range of what
Acceptance
we're
rate.
looking for. Yeah. And then I want to ask myself, well, what are you look liking at Harvard, right? So at Harvard, the student scores an 84. I come down here and I compare it to the score. Actually, it was 84.5. So it was just above the reach of 10%. Actually falls into the risky target
Risky
category
target.
of 25%. Now, like, Harvard is very rarely a quote unquote target, but the student's a very good student and there are good reasons to think they could be successful as they go forward. Let me just see if there's anything interesting about this student that I would note. So, they had standardized test scores were very high. Of course, at Harvard, that's just similar, right? It doesn't help you really, just a bar of entry. I was a little confused by the rigor. Again, the homeschool thing is always a little bit different. So you could argue that this rigor.
This is a case where we'd have to meet the student. Yeah, we're guessing.
Exactly.
We're totally guessing.
So they lost a couple points here on the rigor because I wasn't 100% sure exactly how that would fall at Harvard. Engagement, again, I gave the student a 5 because that's how they self-reported. I'd like to see the quality of that stuff to 100% know. But, at Harvard, I would say that's what you expect. At NYU, it's better than you would expect. At Fordham, it's way better than you would expect. Achievement, the student identifies themselves as national achievements. Again, at Harvard, that's pretty typical. At NYU, it's better than typical. And Fordham, it's way better than typical. Prospective major, the student was history, right? So a humanities area. I would say generally at actually, this is actually, this is a mistake here. This should have been forced. Generally the difference between the prospective major and at each institution is usually the same. Now, once in a while, we'll make a minor change where, like, if you apply to a tech school, it might even be worse than a 1, right? Like if you apply to Carnegie Mellon for computer science, like that is different than applying even to Cornell for computer science because they're known for that, right? So we kind of think through how that impacts it. And then you have, did the student overcome any obstacles? No. Not that that would work. The student was Hispanic, so you get a little bump there for ethnicity. Students domestic, so not going to get harder because of international. The student, I gave a 3 because this is a high school, is a homeschool high school. Then we go on to the hooks. The student's not first generation.
So sorry. What was that 3? The last 3 that you saw, that you looked at?
The high school rating.
Okay, and this is some of our questions are about this, about the rigor of the school. So this is something that admissions offices take into consideration.
Yes.
And you should know that, that the person, the reader for your application is going to know the schools in your area very well. So that's a different person than is reading, the New York City person is a different person than the person who's reading the Texas applications, for example.
Exactly.
So they know your school and they understand the rigor.
Yes, they should 99% of the time. And if you are worried about something you can contextualize it again in the additional information section. Here's something about my curriculum, uniqueness, etc. if you are concerned.
Yeah.
The feeder schools, they know all those schools, but some of the more unique, smaller schools, sometimes they don't. And then first, these are just the hooks, and you can see I don't think the student had any hooks except for no hooks that were any value there.
Right.
Okay, so
we don't know much about the extracurriculars.
Yeah, exactly. So I would say the student is a very good student applying to 5 to 10% admit rate schools. Can they get into Harvard? Yes. Do I think they're going to get in? I need to know more. NYU, I would say, is, if you put this application together the right way, I can't imagine that you don't get into NYU, and Fordham would be super, super conservatively safe from my perspective.
Great. All right, let's look at a couple others.
Then we got Eaton Sanko here, Brooklyn Tech, identified top 5%, identified 1500 to 1540, so doing pretty well there.
Scores. Yeah.
Lowest grade is in English. Don't love that it's an 11th grade, 88, below 90. That will be something that will be identified. We're applying, for a male student in a very competitive space of computer science and math.
Yeah.
The student identified 6 to 8 AP courses. Again, I'm wondering whether or not the students were thinking like, if these are exam scores or if this is total. I would say, based on what I see about the student, this feels like on the lower, I would expect a little bit higher. And if the student is going to 12th for next year and hasn't identified yet, we just kind of want to be in that 9 to 12 category based upon the competitiveness of the space that you're going to be going into, the standardized test scores, et cetera. AP scores, pretty good. We had 3 5s and 1 4. Identify themselves as extremely engaged with national achievements. Again, I'd want to know a little bit more about that. Male, white, U.S. citizenship, not first to attend college. The students' parents or grandparents attended Georgetown, so they didn't identify as that as a school that they actually want to go to. So they don't get if Georgetown was one of the schools that I would have benchmarked, they would have gotten a little bump for that, but they didn't because they didn't identify that. I asked about any unique circumstances, said that it's a 2-mom family with a twin brother with learning disabilities. That could be part of the story. I don't necessarily see that as a quote unquote like unique obstacle. Maybe the twin brother with learning disabilities is not necessarily a personal obstacle.
We
It
don't
could be
know
part of the
enough.
story.
Yeah.
Yeah. The 2-mom family certainly could add to some unique perspectives, but I don't know that it would be kind of fit exactly what we're talking about here. Applying for financial aid, that could have some impact at this need aware schools and off the wait list. And then they identified
How
MIT and
many schools
Princeton.
are need aware, John,
Uh, that's a good
versus
question.
need blind?
Most of them don't market that they're need aware. They don't want to say that out loud. So I don't know off the top of my head. I'd have to take a
No,
look.
no, sure. And sorry, I wasn't putting you on the spot asking like how many exactly. Is it 50 or 70?
Right.
Is this something that students can find on the website, like kind of Google around and see if it says need blind, basically? And if it doesn't, then they know that they're need aware.
I would say that's probably true. I mean, most of the schools probably identify that they're need blind somewhere on their website or somewhere in
That's
their
what I've
stuff.
seen. Yeah, that's what I was wondering.
Even the need blind schools, honestly, are less blind than you would imagine. Like, they like to segment the process. It's like while I'm reading the app, I'm need blind. But like when I'm auditing later on, or if I'm going to the wait list, all of a sudden I'm not as blind as I was before. So,
Right.
something to think
And there's
about.
some inferences, some, maybe guesses that they make that could be wrong, but like what you said at the beginning of our talk tonight, about what your parents do for a living.
Yep.
That
Yeah,
can give you some clues about whether the student is going to need financial aid or not.
definitely. Yeah, that's true too. Okay, so student identified MIT and Princeton. Obviously, the reaches, Carnegie Mellon and BU as targets, and SUNY and Case Western
Mm-hmm.
as the safeties. And so let's see what we got here. This was Eaton.
Mm-hmm.
So in regards to this student, you can see the student computer science math. We'll just kind of quickly go through. I gave a 4.5 because this was a real high school. Then I could ascribe the value a little easier. The SAT score was between 1500 and 1550, so they get a 4. They're applying to MIT. That's enough. Honestly, like you don't need a 1600 to apply to any of these schools. If you're over 1550, you're good everywhere. And between 1500 and 1550, you can apply to every school. That's not going to be the reason you don't get in.
Definitely.
Even at Carnegie Mellon, though, in that space, normally if this would have been like an English app to Carnegie Mellon, I would have maybe given a 3.25 or something, but that's not going to help you in Carnegie Mellon in that space. And then Case Western, even though that was a safe school, Case Western is still a tough school. And I don't think that SAT score is going to significantly move the needle. It's usually not the thing that gets you in. It's the thing that keeps you out.
Mm-hmm.
You can see the student identified the 3, between 7 and 10. So I gave him a 3. I do think that rigor, I'd have to take a look a little more closely at their school and how many other AP classes are being taken by their peers. But those do feel a tiny bit on the light side based on what I'm seeing. Engagement, gave him 5. And again, based on these schools, you get a little, MIT that's expected, CMU, a little better, and then Case Western a little better than that. Objective achievement, again, I'd like to know a little bit more about the achievement, what it's going to look like on the activity list. Can we contextualize how many people there are? I gave him a 5, but again, it's questionable exactly how those will
We
be
don't
viewed
know
by the
enough.
colleges. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
This one, prospective major, right? Computer science gets a 1, right? And then you get a 1 across the board here. This is saying that this is in fact making it
It's a very
significantly harder.
competitive
Yeah,
major.
definitely.
Yeah. Actually, it might be a good time to ask this question. Computer science is a high demand degree. Berkeley and Georgia Tech have put out statements that indicate they will no longer allow transfers to this major. How
Right.
do you suggest building competitive profile if you really are interested in computer science?
Yeah, it's a great question. And we see the exact same thing with health, right?
Yes.
University of California just came out and said, hey, if you want to study public health, you need to identify it on the app or you're not going to be able to study it. And so the technical schools and some of the unique places like University of California have done that. And some of the schools, it's also important to note that even if they haven't done that, and so clearly. Like some of the schools have like taken the social sciences and separated them from the natural
Right.
sciences, and you don't have the flexibility as much. So you do got to check at each school. But I would say 98% of schools that our students apply to are traditionally structured in that you can, in fact, declare computer science. Even if you didn't, I just got to show this because it's important. This is how you become a computer science major at Cornell. And you can see they say criteria 1, you need a grade of C in all completed CS math classes, 2.5 or better in these classes, and a 2.3 or better in these. There's nothing about what did you put down on your app or what did you do in high school, right? It's all about what's happening in college. And so you can declare computer science even if you identified art at a place like Cornell, if you can meet the requirements of the major with your grades at the school. If you were starting early, though, and the goal is to actually build a computer science story that is in your application and you're identifying yourself that way, you need, number 1, to start early. And number 2, you need a P perspective, right? A real perspective about the space. Tell me something about how technology is changing. How's AI changing the way there has to be a perspective, and some
Yes.
perspectives are better than others, but that's the key, perspective. Okay, let me go back. Okay, that was it. That was it for this student. And then I guess we were just talking about the student's chances here. So 5 to 10% of mid-range, basically the same as the student above. And, the student applied for MIT. I do think that is going to be a reach. Why does that look like a reach compared to this risky target for the other student? Well, because MIT and computer science, like that's going to be a super, super tough hit there. CMU, risky target, and then Case Western, I would say, as a conservative target for that student.
Okay.
And then we have Amber Wynn from Bayside High School in Queens, New York, identify themselves as top 25% of their high school class. This kind of, I was surprised with the 19 through 20 on the ACT. So I'm not sure if that means like, well, that's what I took right now and I haven't tried any other ones, but this would be like, if you are top 25% of your high school class, that would be lower than you would want, and you would want to prep, reach out to someone and get some prep work there.
Absolutely. Some students start with that, just because maybe they need to understand some test taking strategy, especially with the ACT. They just don't give you enough time for each question. So that takes a lot of strategy and practice to get faster at those questions. So you
it just feels
you
like
could really know the content really well,
right,
but not have that strategy down. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I would guess, just based, I've done this for a long time, like your top 25% of your high school class, like I would guess that they know enough to do better than this.
You
And this
know
is
enough algebra 2 to,
100%.
yeah. Mm-hmm,
Yeah.
mm-hmm.
Lowest grade was in algebra 2, B,
Oh, okay.
entrepreneurship,
Still a B, yeah.
very competitive space that they identified. Taking,
Yeah.
again, like this, there's, for me, like when I see this, like there's no way you take 6 to 8 AP classes and get a 19 to 20 on the ACT, unless you don't have no clue how to take that test. So I would definitely prep, because you could pop that score, I think, pretty quickly. I think in the AP exam, and again, like depending on what schools you're applying to, I think 5s obviously move the needle in your advantage. 4s generally at top tier schools don't hurt you or help you really. 3s at the best schools can hurt you. At a little bit lower schools are fine. And then 1s and 2s generally are not, hurting you in some way. The student identified strong engagement.
Like, why didn't you study?
Yeah.
It's sort of like, what happened? Yeah.
If that's the case, you should just not even take the AP exam, because, you don't want to have, well, if you're actually in the class itself on your transcript, then you kind of have to take it, because it looks bad if you don't take any of them. If you're just like taking AP exams outside of class, you should only be taking the ones that you think you're going to get 4s and 5s on. There's no reason to take the other ones. Strong engagement. This person, I self-identified, right, that they did research. And I would just say, if we were working with students, like if you've already done research, the advocacy or information sharing afterwards, like that's easy, so like you want to take that and leverage that research into the next level.
Yeah.
Regional achievements, I don't know what that is exactly. I like this, anytime you run your own business, Lisa, right, you and I know this, like you learn so much more than you ever wanted to learn in every area possible, right?
Yeah,
So
that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, great opportunity to like, I would want to pick apart all the different things that they did in the business and think through how, we could.
How to use that on the application. Yeah, all that good evidence.
Female, Hispanic. So, there's some value there in regards to, they're getting some diversity to the college, and they will like that. You have citizenship, and then you also have a double value there, and that you're first to attend college. So you have,
Oh,
you
yeah.
know, diversity and an institutional priority. So that can be valuable.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was really good that the student wrote this. They said, you know, have you overcome any uniquely difficult circumstances? And the student said, yeah, I've felt depressed. And of course, like, I think, you know, we all lived through the pandemic. I'm sure we all from time to time have felt that way, maybe some more than others. This would be a good example of, you don't want to put this down on the app. Like, that will lower your chances, even though it's something we all go through in many ways. You know, you don't know how to be perceived, and you just got to be careful about the way you describe it. Yes, for applying for financial aid, identified Penn and NYU as reach colleges. When I look at that, I think to myself, like, those are two categorically different colleges, and they may both be reaches, but if NYU is in fact a reach, then Penn is way too big of a reach, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And then BU and Babson as the middle, and Baruch and Stony Brook in the as the safe schools. Let's take a
Mm-hmm.
quick look at what we got
That's right.
here.
And John, you're being asked, when you say lowest grade, is that the final grade for the school year or a single term report card?
If on your final transcript, I'm just talking about like I
Yeah.
guess I would say any number that's on your final transcript. Some
So
schools
it
put the
depends the
middle.
way that your
Yeah.
school does the transcript. So ask
Mhm.
your school what they share.
Yep, exactly. So Amber here, you can see top 25% of the class gets a 3, right? If the student now wants to apply to Penn, that's going to be less competitive than you would want to apply to Penn. To BU, I'd say it's still a little bit below where you'd want to be. I mean, top 25%, you could still get there. Stony Brook, I think you're fine. The SAT, this one threw the whole thing off because, you know, if I give a 1 here, you know, that lowers the overall grade rather significantly. At Penn, you're going to get a 1. Now, BU and Stony Brook, you can apply optionally. So I gave them just 3 similar, because you can argue that there's a way for us to do that and not get the worst, you know, score. The rigor rating was the same as the other 3 students, which, again, like, you're talking about, these 2 students both identified 6 to 8 AP classes and a 1,500 plus SAT scores. This one says 6 to 8 and has a 19 on the ACT. So, you know, kind of just doesn't really fit. Then we get over to the engagement. The student kind of gave themselves a 4 of engagement level. I'd say at Penn, that's too low. At Boston University, that would be fine. At Stony Brook, it'd be a little better than fine.
Mm-hmm.
The achievement, the student didn't, I don't think had, said they were regional achievements, didn't give us too much insight. I would assume at Penn, it's below where we need to be. Usually achievement isn't that big a deal at most schools. So at BU, I just gave it the standard score. I don't think it's too big of an issue as achievement. Prospective major, the student is basically business. And I would say that a lot of people think business is super competitive, but I don't really think it is competitive. I think there's a lot of people who apply there, but the quality of what they put out is really not that good. So 3 I put as kind of a
That's interesting.
standard. Yeah. And then I give the 3 across the board for all the schools they're applying to. Let's see, these are all, you know, how you apply isn't going to change. There was no personal story that mattered. The student did have ethnicity values, so that was added there. Citizenship was the same. This high school is, 90+% of the students are going to four-year colleges, so it's a well-known school. The student is first generation, so gets a little bump there. They are, you know, it's not, business isn't necessarily like a quote unquote STEM area that they're like, but usually females in business are a little underrepresented. So I kind of gave a half score there to bump it a tiny bit. No geographic diversity, no sibling in school, no hook, and no VIP status, right? So then we get back, and the student falls into a 20 to 35% admit rate category. So that would be like, you know, could you apply to Emory 10 to 20% type schools? Yes. But I would say UCSD, University of California, San Diego, that type of school is probably where the student is. Now, this feels a little lower than I would expect, mostly because the standardized test score was so low and it kind of skewed
Right.
the
So
results a
just
little bit.
getting that standardized test score up is gonna really bump this application majorly for this particular one. Yeah.
Exactly.
And sorry, just time check. Somehow it's 7:47.
Oh my God. I'm so
And
sorry.
we gave an hour and a half for this. No, but this is so much information. We have so many engaged people here asking amazing questions. We still have a ton of people with us, and we've been talking to you for an hour 47. So this is really fantastic. I see everybody's really engaged and enjoying it. I
Let me
know
just put all of them
I'm
out here
being
then.
told that you have a meeting with a client at 8 p.m.
Oh.
just to show you how how much how important our clients are to us. So I'm wondering if you need a break, or if you want to go another 5 minutes, or what do you
I'm
want to
fine
do?
to go right into the 8. That's
You're
absolutely fine.
amazing.
Yeah.
We have 2 more, right? 2 more chance me's.
Two more. Yeah. So let
Okay.
me just bring up the quick.
Ooh, what is this? I just got balloons.
Okay, so I'm going to go through this quickly. This is Alex. They both, actually, both the final two students both identified Stuyvesant. So you have Alex from Stuyvesant, and you have, I love this, Sty or Die from Alex from Stuyvesant, which is great.
Yes.
So this student identified themselves top 50%. You know, Stuyvesant's are, these schools are different because of entrance exams and stuff. Like that's not the same as being top 50% of a school that you didn't have that. So, you know, you have to take a grain of salt with this algorithm. That's why I say it's part art, part science. The second student identified top 2%. Okay, so we can keep coming down here. This student identified, I find this so, again, like, you know what, this is what the one that showed me that things are changing. Like they identified 10 to 50, but down here, they said, but I'm going to get a 1500 or above when I actually take it, right? So sometimes it's like, I'm guessing that's the score that they have right now, right? But that they're expecting to do better. This student identified over 1550. You can see this student wants feminist gender and sexuality studies. That's a pretty specific area, and it is unique. This student identified engineering as the area, or environmental science, but I did it as engineering. This student said 9 to 12 AP classes. This student said 6 to 8 AP classes. This student has taken a few AP exams, didn't identify the scores. This student said they haven't taken any yet. This student says they have little or no achievement. I always think that this is really based upon like the way they perceive their achievements, you know, as opposed to whether they
Right.
have it or not. Because this student says national achievements. And like usually when I look at these things, that they're not exactly what the students imagine. You know, they're probably somewhere in between. This student, you know, do you have any evidence or deliverables, right? I use that term. The student said, I'm a sophomore. I'm working on deliverables. I plan to do research and start a program to help foster youth. And so I think, you know, if you're already in 10th, if you're in 10th grade and you're already thinking about doing research and you have a plan, that's a big start, honestly. Now, what's the best question you can ask? And this is the best story you could tell. Those are different questions that we could ask. This student says they published a book, published research, 2 published blogs, has the President's Volunteer Service Award, plus 250 hours, you know, of service. You have this intergenerational award, which you definitely would want to contextualize in your additional information section. Featured in a corporate annual report. That's really interesting. I don't know what that means exactly, but that's the type of thing that would need context in the additional information
Yeah.
section.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see here, male and mix, and this was female and Asian. So, you know, Asian is going to be harder. Mix, usually when you're mix, it depends on the Common App. They used to ask, I guess they've changed it now. It used to be like, what type of mix are you? I'm not sure what it says now, if they even asked that question now that they've changed it. First to attend college, no. First to attend college, no. This student parents have degrees from Princeton, Columbia, and Georgetown. They say they're not going to apply to those places, though, which is funny. I would tell you that, you know, even in the world where legacy has kind of taken a hit socially, you know, that there's some issues with how legacy and privilege works. I still think it has an impact at some of these schools. So, you know, you might want to consider that. Usually it only impacts if you apply early. Columbia has an early decision. Princeton and Georgetown do not. So you could argue that it would have the biggest impact at Columbia. Okay, and then we get into, this student had some legacy at NYU and University of Toronto. No siblings. This student also had no siblings. In regards to like any difficult circumstances, this student said my parents were divorced. I'm sure that was difficult. Single mom ended a partnership. I would tell you when it's all said and done, like that's not going to be enough. And I wouldn't really bring that up in the app from my perspective. This student identified a general anxiety disorder and asked, you know, said wasn't planning on disclosing it in applications. I would not disclose it. You know, if you have a individual educational plan, IEP, those are things are different. And then you probably do want to, like, you're going to want the services. And so to some degree, you might need to identify. But if you don't, then I would not. Applying for my financial aid, no. And then we get down to the breach schools. The students at MIT and Harvard, the students at Stanford and Princeton. You can see that their target schools, RPI and RIT, you know, this just shows you like kind of difference in perception, right? Like this student went from MIT and Harvey Mudd all the way down to RPI and RIT. This student goes from Stanford and Princeton down to Cornell. Like these schools are a lot closer than those schools, than
Right.
the, you know,
Definitely.
and then this student goes all the way down to University of Alabama as the safe school, which is pretty, you know, this student definitely getting in there. And then kind of gives us a short overview of their background. This student is saying, you know, as a safe school like UMich or UCLA, Maybe UWash, but maybe that's WashU. I don't know. But like, UMich and UCLA, I would say for this student actually is relatively safe, but you can't take highly selective schools like UCLA and call them quote unquote safe because you might not get in, even though you might be better than most of the students in the applicant pool. Okay, so let me go down to the responses. You can see I think the last student, the Steyer Dye, is a very, very talented student. I think that they do fall into that top 5 admit rate category of applying to schools less than 5% Harvard level schools. The uniqueness of their area, gender and sexuality studies, with a lot of engagement, makes that a viable possibility. This student up here is not academically relatively similar, but applying in engineering, just a different area and a little less engagement from my perspective as well. And so then you look at the schools like Harvey Mudd. I would say Harvey Mudd for engineering is really quite difficult. It's also a fantastic school and a unique program. A lot of kids really like it. I don't think that there's enough here, honestly, for engineering at Harvey Mudd. I think that you need more as it relates to, engineering solutions to problems. And you might have that. I just didn't see it maybe in the form. RPI, I would say, is a conservative target. Like students going to get in there, and they're definitely getting into University of Alabama. This student was really close to being a kind of almost a risky target at Stanford. If this was outside of this academic area, I would say it'd be harder. But in that academic area at Stanford, with all the achievement, I would say it's close to a risky target. Cornell, I would say, the thing is, like, gender and sexuality studies at Cornell actually is relatively popular in the arts and sciences college. So maybe my knowledge of that specific program changed it just a tiny bit. And then University of Michigan, I would say that this student is academically stronger than the typical student admitted to University of Michigan. And so as long as they apply early in the cycle, because there's a huge school, you want to get in early, I would expect they would be admitted. If you apply late and they made a lot of decisions already, I could see how that's how you get deferred or waitlisted. Okay, that was super fast. Any questions
Amazing,
there?
though. We learned so much talking to you always, John. This was incredible. Wow, 7:55. All right, I feel like you need to get some water before your next meeting, or it looks like you have some. That's good. Uh, just a question here about should I mention 504 and my 504 in the Common App?
You should talk to someone about that. It really very much depends on what the accommodations are. And if it's minimal and you don't plan to use them in college, I would say no. If they're more significant and you need to understand the resources and stuff, then I probably would.
Yeah. Okay, wonderful. Um, any other questions that people have? You will hear from us via email. We're happy to help in many different ways. I can send you a list of all the things that we do with students, from teaching them to be good personal essay writers, to helping them find their research question, to reviewing applications and giving our comments, and everything in between, or all of it. So, John, it's always incredible talking to you and hearing your perspective.
This was great.
And I know I've even gotten emails during this presentation saying how people are enjoying hearing you talk, and they're really starting to understand how the mind of the admissions officers works, which is our goal here. So thank you everyone for the great questions.
Thank you, Lisa, for hosting and making this such a great session. I really appreciate it, and I'm looking forward to doing more in the future.
Yeah, we need to do more of these for sure. Take care.
All right,
Bye.
thanks. Bye-bye.